was very surprised to find out that this game had the following that it did. While it's small, it's just as devoted as Sonic and Mario.
After I reviewed Blinx the Time Sweeper the first time, I got the usual comments, some agreeing with me, others respectfully disagreeing with me, saying that they liked the game, and went on to say to each their own. Then things went dormant for a while. Then all of a sudden, the floodgates opened and the video was getting bombarded with people cursing me out every day. All because, and to put it nicely, I said that it wasn't really that good. I have no idea where these Blinx fans came from, and to be honest, I didn't think they existed. If you like Blinx, great, more power to you. I won't say you're wrong for liking it. It's not like you're saying that you like Bubsy 3D or Superman 64, but as someone who played Ratchet and Clank, which is a very similar game to Blinx, it leaves a lot to be desired and feels disappointing. Blinx the Time Sweeper was universally met with lukewarm reception. GameSpy said it was one of the most overrated games ever. GameSpot gave it a fair rating. 3 reviewers from Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it a 7.5 out of 10, a 5.5 out of 10, and an 8 out of 10. And Japan's Famitsu rated a 31 out of 40, which is about a 7.7 out of 10. And then after averaging all the scores on GameFAQs, it's about a 6.8 out of 10. After averaging all of those scores and translating them over to my scale, it would put it around bargain bin fodder to decent.
I've seen people defend games that they liked. Some methods are silly, like using non-canon examples, stuff like that. But in the original Blinx review, some of the methods that they used were just futile.
Just because you disagree with someone's opinion, you can't make up things to try and invalidate their opinion. The dumbest thing I heard was someone saying that a review has to be objective. Then why would you watch or read a review if it was objective? To be objective, that means that you just state facts and you don't share your personal opinion. You want a 100% purely objective review? Fine, here it is. Blinx the Time Sweeper is a run-and-gun platform game about a cat that can manipulate time. He fights time monsters in a bunch of levels and occasionally fights pigs. The game has graphics and it has sounds. There, objective review over. Those 38 words are an objective review in the purest sense. Do you see the problem here? It's going to open up the door to questions like how does it control? Is it fun? Did I like it or dislike it and why? Is it worth playing? If I were to answer any of those questions, I would be voicing an opinion and that would defeat the purpose of it being objective, as answering those questions brings in subjectivity. A review is subjective. What was Roger Ebert's career until his death? He reviewed movies. He gave his opinions on them. That opinion is subjective. All these gaming magazines and websites, the second they attach a score to that game, it's no longer objective because that score is their opinion, which is subjective.
Why do you watch or read a review? It's because you want to know the opinion that that person has. You can disagree with it, but the second you get angry and rage at them because their opinion is different than yours, then you have some problems.
By trying to use the objective defense to defend a game you like, thinking it will invalidate the review, you just invalidated yourself because you're not being objective either. Reviews are supposed to be subjective, so that way you can get an idea of what is being reviewed before you try it yourself. And if you call a review bad and get angry just because you disagree with the opinion, that proves that you can't handle opinions that differentiate from yours. And it makes me wonder what you're even doing on the internet, which is full of opinions that are going to be different than yours. It makes me wonder if you just go around to websites raging at people that disagree with you. If you like a game that someone doesn't, fine. Again, more power to you, but there's no need to act like the person you disagree with desecrated the grave of one of your family members. Even if someone bashes the game, don't you think it's silly to get angry and try to defend a piece of software? It's an inanimate object.
Let me put it to you this way. You're at a store with someone and you're shopping for shower curtains, and they tell you that the one that you picked out, they don't really like, and you just start yelling and screaming at them. Not only do you look crazy, you look foolish to everyone else around you.
The only reason why you would rage at someone's opinion is because subconsciously you don't think it's that good and therefore have to do mental gymnastics to prove to yourself that you really think the game is as good as your conscious mind leads you to believe. If you disagree, disagree, but don't rage and be that immature and childish stereotype that has become a huge black mark on the face of the gaming community. Be civil and prove that negative stereotype about gamers wrong. Now that that little rant is over, Blinx came out October 7th, 2002 on the original Xbox, 28 days before Ratchet and Clank landed on the PS2. Ratchet and Clank is also a platform game with run-and-gun elements. Before I continue, I highly recommend that you pause this video and watch my Ratchet & Clank review first, because both games have a lot of similarities, and as someone who played Ratchet & Clank back when it was out, Blinx feels the same but lacks so much. I would probably bring in Jak 2, but that game came out in 2003 and is radically different when it comes to level design, as that is an open world while Ratchet and Blinx have levels that are confined.
The reason why I'm bringing up Ratchet & Clank is because I feel that game gave us everything that we wanted to see during the 6th generation. And Blinx, on the other hand, just feels like it gives us the bare minimum.
The graphics in Blinx are pretty good, although I feel that they're conflicting. Blinx looks good and looks like he could fit right into a Star Fox game with no problem. He's bright and colorfully designed, but he's a pretty stark contrast to the gritty and dark levels, making it look like he doesn't fit in. Similar to how Sonic Team recycled the bright and colorful models from Sonic Heroes into the dark and gritty looking Shadow the Hedgehog game. They just didn't fit. The enemies you fight look way too cartoonish when compared to Blinx and the levels. It looks like Blinx, the enemies, and levels were all made with different art styles, so it feels like it's lacking consistency. In Ratchet & Clank, the art style was consistent. All the elements looked like they belonged in that game. Yeah, the graphics are good in Blinx, but I feel that they could have been more consistent with the art style that they went with. Because, like I said, Blinx looks like he was ripped right out of a Star Fox game and the monsters are overly cartoonish. I'm not a fan of the music here. It just really rubs me the wrong way. And the first level is all that I remember almost note for note because it gave me a headache. The music for the other levels were pretty calming, but nothing that got me in the mood to play it. Although the boss music did feel like boss music.
But that's the thing with music. It's either your taste or it isn't. Some people have told me that the music in Blinx the Time Sweeper is some of the best on the original Xbox. And, well, I'll just have to take your word for it.
If you're playing it on a 360 like I am, you're going to notice that the game has a terrible frame rate, which I pointed out in my original review. And there were so many people saying that the reason the frame rate was bad was because I was playing it on a 360. Why would you state something that I already said like I didn't know? Of course I know what I said. I said it. Telling me something that I said only shows that you weren't paying attention. Additionally, you'll notice the occasional pause during gameplay, which is also due to me playing it on a 360. I find it weird that this game has issues playing on a 360 while other original Xbox games I've played on the 360 had no issues. But now I'm going to move on to gameplay, which I'm sorry to say is very bare bones. The game is broken up into 9 worlds with 3 stages each, and each world contains a boss stage. You travel through each stage and defeat monsters, and that's all you do. Each stage has a certain amount of monsters that you must defeat before you can exit, and you must do this for each stage in a 10-minute time limit. Normally this is fine, but the problem here is that Blinx runs really slow. His running animation doesn't match his speed. He looks like he's running pretty quickly, but he's not. Ratchet's leisurely jog was much faster than Blinx running at full speed.
Jak, Ratchet, Sly, Mario, Croc, and even Bubsy in Bubsy 3D run a lot faster than Blinx does, and combined with the time limit, it makes it a literal race against time.
It doesn't help when the stages get bigger and more complicated, because then you're rushing, which gives you no time to explore. And as you climb up in stages, the enemies need to take more damage to defeat, like these giant slime monsters. Although there's actually a trick to defeating them, but it requires a certain sweeper. Something you wouldn't know unless you looked it up, by the way. It doesn't help that you only have 5 rounds of ammunition to fire either, so when you run out, you have to scavenge for more. Yes, there's a sweeper pack so you can hold a total of 10 pieces of garbage, and there's sweepers with different effects, which brings me to the in-game economy. In Blinx, it hinders your progression terribly. Finding gold is rare. You may pick up 1 or 2 gold pieces normally, or you may come upon a small treasure trove, usually in the second stage of each world. You may only get around 1,000 to 2,000 when you complete a world, so when you go to the shop you can only buy 1 item because most of the items cost anywhere from 1,000 and up. And as you go up in the stages you'll need to get more retries and time control holders, because the amount of enemies increase. In Ratchet & Clank you're given a decent amount of bolts per planet, allowing you to buy at least 1 new gadget so that you're not grinding for money unless you want the really big weapons.
Blinx was made in Japan, and what are Japanese games known for? Grinding, grinding, and more grinding.
I understand that it's a cultural thing, that anything that's not repetitive or filled with menus is often shunned. It makes me wonder if there is some sort of conspiracy in Japan where games have subliminal messages in them to train Japanese children for whatever corporate peons they're going to be when they become an adult. Blinx feels like one of those games where you have to continually grind so that you don't suck at it. In the later levels I found myself grinding them because I was running out of time and progressing a little further on each playthrough. I don't find this game difficult at all, but it feels like I may be doing something wrong, although I don't think that I am. The game is pretty much go to a stage, kill the monsters. Go to a stage, kill the monsters. Go to a stage, kill the monsters. There really is nothing more to it than that. In Ratchet & Clank, the planets you went to had an array of missions for you to complete. Most of them were get from point A to point B, but there was a sense of adventure. You weren't required to kill all the enemies on the screen. Depending on your skill, you could bypass them. Which brings me to combat. In Blinx, before you can do anything, you need to suck up any trash that's sitting around for ammunition, which is fine. Ratchet had crates that would hold ammo, but you can only hold 5 at a time, but you can get an upgrade so you can hold 10.
Even with 10, that's not really a lot to work with, especially when you go up in later levels where enemies take 2 to 3 hits to defeat and there's multiple enemies in that same area that you're in. Even if you reload on the run, you may have to backtrack to collect more garbage for the bigger fights.
I think a melee attack would be nice to have for emergency situations, as some monsters move faster than Blinx does, and a melee attack would help get the monsters off your back in those situations. But there's other flaws with combat. I've seen projectiles just drop out in front of Blinx instead of firing towards an enemy as if it was hitting an invisible wall. After you hit an enemy, you have to wait for them to recover before you can fire at them again, otherwise you're just wasting ammo. This is a waste of time. It doesn't help that the combat is not really that fast, especially when time is of the essence. There's also no easy way to aim. You'll just fire in the direction you're facing, and you can't move when you suck up garbage. In Ratchet, if you hit an enemy, they'd be knocked back, but you didn't have to wait for them to recover. You could keep hitting them until they're defeated, and you could aim a little bit better with a somewhat finicky auto-aim. Then there's how the hit points and lives work. They function as one and the same, and are called retries. You take a hit, you lose a retry. The game rewinds back to a point before Blinx took damage, much like a checkpoint. Lose all your retries and it's game over and you have to start the level over again. It's a strange take on the one hit and you're dead mechanic. I don't like that it rewinds to a certain point, because it may not put you at a safe spot and will revive any fallen enemies. Like this spot for example. I kill this monster, get hit by another, it rewinds, revives the monster, and puts me in a spot that's mid-jump before I did a double jump. Only this time, it doesn't let me double jump, so I fall and get sent back to the bottom of the stage.
I understand that this has to do with the whole time gimmick, but they're choosing flair over function. The retry should act as actual hit points. You take a hit, and you just keep going.
Speaking of gimmicks, like Ratchet & Clank having the weapons and gadget gimmick, the one in this game is to control time, which is a really good and interesting concept. You collect time gems by finding them in the levels or by defeating monsters which drop up to 3 random crystals. You have to collect at least 3 of one type of crystal to gain that time control. If you collect 4, you get 2. You can collect purple plus symbols for rewind, blue moons for pause, orange pyramids for fast forward, yellow stars for slow, and green diamonds for record. Unfortunately, they're not magically delicious. While having to collect the gems is fine to use the time controls, although it's slightly annoying as you have to match 3 at a time and sometimes the ones dropped from enemies clump together so you may accidentally screw up a crystal combo and the time crystals don't respawn. So if you screw up a puzzle or don't have the required time control, you have to restart the level. Someone told me that you need to plan ahead, but how can you plan ahead when you don't know what's coming? If you hold on to a time control that you think you may need, that's space you may be wasting for other time controls that you do need. But another issue is that the time controls are barely required. The game heavily advertises the time control mechanic, but it's optional for a majority of the game. You only need rewind to fix fallen bridges, and record to solve the rare puzzle that requires 2 Blinx characters. I mostly stocked up on pause controls as that's really the only one you'll need, allowing you to pause and shoot enemies and get an advantage. Let's take a look at Braid for a second. That's a platform game and the whole thing is about time manipulation. Sure, Braid came out 6 years after Blinx, but it really demonstrates the potential of controlling time, which I feel Blinx really wasted that potential.
Blinx is a really good concept for a platform game. It could have given Jak and Ratchet a run for their money, but they just didn't go all the way.
Let's look at some other 6th generation games. Jak and Daxter really wowed people with its vast open world with no load times as all the loading was done in the background and it had very fluid animations during the cutscenes. Ratchet had loading screens, but they were short clips of your ship flying through space. These games had an amazing presentation. You got to talk to NPCs which made the world feel real, and you would get to watch cutscenes at certain points which pushed the story along and made it feel like you were making real progress. Blinx lacks the presentation that its competitors had on the PS2. We get a cutscene at the very beginning of the game and one at the end. There's nothing in between. I'm not asking for a cutscene between stages, but maybe one between each world. Show us that we're making some progress. Or some character development. Show us anything, really. I don't feel like I'm on an adventure. Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Super Mario Sunshine felt like a huge adventure. Blinx feels more like a chore.
I could forgive everything, if Blinx just wasn't so boring to me.
Last time I was this bored playing a game, I was playing Superman 64. Now, Blinx is leagues ahead of Superman 64 in terms of quality, but you're just killing monsters. Occasionally you're fighting members of the Tom Tom gang, but those fights aren't really anything as they just appear and circle around for a minute. Why not rescue some of the sweepers that fail to evacuate the world you're trying to save? Give us some other objectives. There's really no sense of danger or excitement. The monsters are really goofy looking and they have very basic attacks, and the bosses are just larger versions of the enemies you encountered in the stages. You encounter pretty much the same 5 enemies that they recolor and give slightly larger health pools. There's 8 bosses and 4 of them are recolors of previous bosses. And the bosses are just larger versions of the enemies that you've already encountered. In Ratchet there was more enemy variety. Yes, they were divided up in small, medium, and large, but there are at least some differences between them, and variety in the bosses. Jak and Daxter had different types of enemies as well. In Blinx, it feels sad that they just took the easy way out by copying and pasting their enemies and recoloring them.
I really want to like Blinx, but I'm just so disappointed with its gameplay. It does what it does well, but it just leaves me wanting more.
The game controls fine. I like that the double jump is an actual second jump. I like the visuals despite that it feels like they're conflicting art styles. I really like the concept, but they just didn't go the distance when making it. When it comes to age, it just feels so obsolete even for its time. Maybe if it was an early PS1 title, or maybe even a 2D platformer on the Genesis or SNES, it would have been seen as revolutionary. I can see why people like it. It's got some kind of charm to it, and if you only had an Xbox during the time, I can understand you loving this game. But for me, I first played Ratchet & Clank around 2003, and I played all the Sony platform games, and I didn't play Blinx until much later. So I guess you can say that I've been spoiled by the Sony platform games. I am not biased against Blinx, but I just want more than it has to offer. It's like having a cupcake without frosting. And now that I've played Ratchet and Blinx back to back, and they feel very similar in gameplay. Ratchet just has more presentation. It feels like it offers so much more and feels like there's more effort put into it, and that's what made it such a great game. In my opinion, Blinx is just okay. It feels so bare bones though. I think that maybe if there was more to it, it would have been a series that made it past 2 games and continued onto the 360 and onto the Xbox One. I did play Blinx 2 before putting this review together, and that's what Blinx 1 should have been. It's marginally better and feels more complete, and it has all the presentation that I've been craving. It makes Blinx 1 feel like it was rushed out the door, and I'll review that game at a later date.
My feelings for the game haven't changed at all. Blinx is a really good concept, but I feel that the execution was done poorly, and for me, it leaves a lot to be desired. If you like the game, great, enjoy. I'm not going to say that you're wrong for liking it. It's just not a game for me.